In today's episode, I'm joined by clinical psychologist Nevern Subermoney. Our conversation traverses what we pay attention to, altered states of consciousness, a little meander into theology and how we all make sense of the world and the stories that we attach value to. We also get into AI and how social media and technology are impacting mental health in a supportive and destructive way. At the heart of this conversation is a question that I think is so important for each of us to ask ourselves. How do you feel about the life that you are actually living? With Dr. Skye. Welcome to another episode of Health with Heart with me, Skye. I'm here today with Nevern Subermoney, which we've just described or defined as a term of enormous abundance. And he is a clinical psychologist. And we are going to see where our conversation leads us today. Shall we begin with your early story and how that brought you to or led you to the work that you do today?
Yes, so firstly, thanks for having me. It's a lovely space that you have here, and happy to be here. But in terms of my early years, I was quite a reflective, introspective child, I would say, growing up. So I'd often be a bit of the loner. Not that I wasn't sociable, but I liked a lot of alone time to think, to reflect, to ponder. Also very sensitive to other people's emotions and moods. And so I think there was a bit of a sensitivity that I had interpersonally and probably emotionally, probably in terms of senses like sounds, smells, and things like that. And so I spent a lot of time sort of in my own bubble, just reflecting, and a lot of time trying to manage other people's emotions at home or being the mediator. And so I think a lot of that probably naturally culminated into getting into psychology. But I didn't start there because I actually, the subjects I did the best in during my school years were math and science. So, if you're good at math and science, you get pushed down certain tracks. And especially if you come from an Indian home, so engineering is highly regarded.
Okay.
And my dad's an engineer. And so I went into mechanical engineering, probably the furthest thing from the human sciences. And so I studied that for 2 years, and I had some vacation work with the Council of Scientific Research. And I was working there during my vacation, and I just felt this emptiness, just deep in my core, somewhere here, this solar plexus region, just this emptiness at being there. I realized in that moment, at the end of my second year, I was 20, yeah.
Okay.
So I realized at the age of 20 that working on these mechanical designs of quadrocopters and things like that wasn't fulfilling. It didn't have enough of a human element to it. It didn't have enough emotion and feeling, and it didn't have enough of positive impact in people's lives that I like feeling. And so I started exploring the university brochure to see what's out there. Because again, I think a lot of children aren't aware of the possibilities out there. We kind of have like 5 options in our mind as to what success looks like.
And you have these very binary ideas of professions.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, very binary, very caricatured. And so I went through the brochure, psychology jumped out at me. And then a friend invited me to his psychology lectures. And I went to the first lecture and I loved it. Like I just fell in love with the concepts. Like that first class was better than the collective joy I had over the 2 years of engineering.
Yes.
Within just the space of a 1-hour lecture. And so I thought, I need to do this. Luckily, my parents were supportive enough with it. I switched, and I've enjoyed it ever since, every step of the way. I feel so honored to be in a profession where, as I'm learning the content of my field, I'm also learning more about myself in the process, and also learning more about other people, and also learning about how to make lives better in the ways. and make good money from it. So I just, it feels like the perfect intersection.
Amazing. It's so wonderful when you can monetize something that gives you such joy.
Yes.
Tell me a little bit more about that sort of, that heightened sense of people that you had growing up as a child. Did that feel like a superpower, or did you feel burdened by it when you were little?
It was definitely a mixed bag, because I had lots of experience where other family members considered it a weakness. And so I was treated sometimes in through terms like you're too sensitive, or you are, you just need to get on with life or get on with things, or you're overthinking things, so there was a tough element to that. There was a tough side about being a bit more sensitive, especially as a man.
As a man, I was about to say, because I think that we, in our stereotypes and caricatures, we tend to associate those sort of virtues with females.
Yeah, that more of a caregiving instinct and an emotional sensitivity. Definitely, it's more associated with females. So that was tough at times. But as time went on, I really grew into it. And I think studying psychology helped, because when you go through the personality lectures, you start to realize that there are no good and bad personalities. It's all about a personality in context. And the context of psychotherapy, being emotionally attuned and sensitive to what another person is feeling, and those mild fluctuations moment to moment, really helps you just zone in, just catch things that someone else might not. And sometimes the person who's experiencing it doesn't quite catch. And so I found that it's helped me in my clinical practice. But definitely in the earlier years, a bit more of a burden to me, but also helpful in the early years toward the people who are around me, who I could be there for.
I'm wondering if there's anyone listening who has a child right now that embodies what you've just described. And if there's any loving wisdom that you could give those parents about how to better support and empower and protect, I also think maybe there's a piece around that. These small sentient beings.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I would say that regardless of what your child is like, whether they're emotionally sensitive or a bit more analytical, or whatever the case is, I think a useful question is always to ask, where would this child's personality shine? I think that's a good question, because sometimes we do go straight to the evaluative frame of mind when we're thinking about personality traits. This person isn't as conscientious, and that's a bad thing. This person isn't tidy or neat. But there are settings and contexts and professions where not being conscientious, it allows you to excel. And so I think for any parent out there, if they're automatically and impulsively just throwing a good bad label onto a child's personality, I think I would ask them to think about context. Where would this child shine? What are the contexts that they should probably steer away from?
You do a lot of online education, and am I right that your entire practice is online?
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about how that came about. Was that intentional, and how you've mastered structuring your life around working online?
Yes, so in 2020, there was this little thing called COVID. Yeah, from that. And that was actually when I started my private practice. So
Great timing.
It was in the midst of that, and it felt like the worst timing at the time. And I had a physical office just for a bit of time, and then eventually the lockdown hit, and I had to go online. And I found that about 90 to 95% of the clients that I had at the time were happy to move online. Out of that, 5 to 10% said, I'm good, Nevern, like I'm going to find someone in person. This doesn't work for me. Off the bat, they said that. Those who started online with me, none of them discontinued because of being online. So they actually found it comfortable. They liked being in the comfort of their own bed, in a private space when they're speaking about emotional content. So I think there was a lot that was surprising to me because I thought I was going to lose a lot of clientele because of that.
Mm-hmm.
And then in terms of acquiring new clients, I found that, again, that figure of 90 to 95% of people who contact me are fine when I tell them that my practice is online. And so that's been very surprising to me. But I'm glad it was a pleasant surprise. And obviously due to the fact that 90 to 95% of my clients were already okay with that, and the new clients coming in were fine with it too. And I found that it was working well enough. I just continued down that path.
And your educational videos and reels that you did that just naturally grow out of advertising your practice? Because that's clearly something that you love to do and that you're very good at.
Yeah, so when I was younger, I'm the eldest cousin out of all my cousins, so I was kind of always a big brother to them. And everyone calls me Big Brother in Tamil. It's called Anna. So everyone calls me Anna,
Mm-hmm.
Big Brother. And so what I used to do is get all these little cousins together and siblings and then direct little homemade films
Yes.
with them just for fun, because I was that generation that was lucky enough to start having these digital phones when I was in late primary school. And so this was so cool to me to have a camera on me all the time. And I think I'm naturally creative. Like I'm into music and I was into drawing and things like that. So media just came naturally to me. And so I direct them into these like horror, romance, little telenovelas. And just like that, I started to take out some books at the library, at the public library, when you used to have those cards and you could take out like 5.
I still have one of those.
Do you? Oh, amazing. Yeah, so I used to take out like a few books on film production and setting and filming. And so that was what I got into. And naturally, when I became a psychologist, I thought, why not use that skill set to just keep creating? Because I enjoy the process of creating, and use it to just make some of these things that I'm learning about more accessible. So that's how it started. I started my YouTube channel in 2019 when I was in my internship, and then I've just been running with that since then.
Amazing. One of the themes that emerges a lot in the content that you make are these very calm, slow, steady, guided, I want to call it an embodiment tool, but you can correct me if I'm wrong, where you kind of trick people out of their worrying loops. Do you want to talk us through what you're doing there and why it works and why it's such a useful tool for people who are ruminating to use?
Right. So I think it's a very interesting question, because I think the why it works aspect can be divided into probably 2 sections. One section of why it works is, why does it hold attention? Why does it grab and hold attention? And I think that's a separate question from why does it work, in the sense of why does it leave you with a positive conscious state afterwards. So if we start with the grab and hold attention, something I've realized through the years in terms of creating content is that the most knowledgeable minds, the professors who really, they spend 3-4 decades just studying one aspect of human biology or a psychological process, those people aren't the most visible on media, as I'm sure you know. And so there's this problem of the people with the most expertise aren't necessarily the most equipped to grab attention through our modern platforms, the places where attention actually resides. They're not present in those spaces, and if they are, they don't know how to hook attention and sustain attention. So I saw that as a problem. And then on the other end, there are people who are really good at holding attention, but they're not necessarily experts, and the information they're sharing is not necessarily credible. So I wanted to take the best of both. Like, what are these people who are getting millions of views and watch time, what are they doing right to grab and hold attention? And what are the experts getting right in terms of what actually shifts conscious experience? And so I put those together. For a while, I was just interested in what shifts conscious experience. And so I would create content on guided meditations, for example, and say, hi, my name is Nevern, I'm a psychologist. This is a guided meditation. I'm going to guide you through, this is what mindfulness meditation is, etc. And those videos would get about 100 views if I was lucky. But then I started to investigate social media and what works and what drives performance. And I realized that with the guided sort of content that I'm doing, you lose attention if you say hi, and if you introduce yourself, and if you explain what the exercise is. Because a lot of what drives the performance in terms of holding attention is curiosity. Mm-hmm. People who know that you're doing a breathing exercise won't necessarily stick around for it because they think they've
got the punchline already.
Yeah, they've got the punchline, and they're treating it like this cognitive exercise. Like, oh, I know what you're doing. I know what a breathing exercise is. But to come back to the word embodiment that you're speaking about, they know cognitively, but they're not necessarily embodying a calm state in that moment. And so the curiosity and not revealing what the exercise is by saying something like, hey, can you do this with your mouth or that with your face, grabs attention. Mm-hmm. And then the curiosity holds attention long enough for me to provide the nervous system based exercise for them.
It's so clever. And I think, that sort of divide between cognitively engaging with the world and engaging with the world in a more embodied sense. Wait, I'm not sure how do I say this? So how do we marry embodiment with conscious experience? Because consciousness is not physical. And I think it's so interesting that you use the physical form to create consciousness. Mm-hmm. Do you know what I mean? There's a kind of paradox there.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Consciousness is so ethereal. It's so misty. It's so intangible that it's difficult to speak about. But at the same time, it's all we have, right? Anything that you're experiencing right now, it's part of your conscious bubble. So it's the entirety of your experience. All of that is happening in this conscious space right now. This is the sound of my voice, the feeling of the chair underneath you, the thoughts as you're formulating questions for me. All of that is happening in that space. So it's kind of like this weird paradox where it's so difficult to touch, but yet it's the space in which everything occurs. And so I think if you think about it as a space in which everything occurs, then there are so many doorways to it. And the body is one of them. But anything you can place your awareness on, really, whether it be the body, whether it be the environment around you through your senses and the sense data that's coming in, whether it is some psychological process going on in your mind, like some thought, some memory, some impulse or urge, anything that you could place your awareness on is locating something in the space of consciousness. And so I see it as a paradox, like you described it, but I also see it as it's so easy to access in a way because everything's happening in that space. And so the body I see as just one of those. I think the advantage of using the body is that it's always close to you. So it's never too far away.
You take yourself wherever you go.
Yeah, you take yourself wherever you go. That's a good way of putting it. And I think that's the advantage. And I think the other advantage of the body, especially the breath, is that it can provide a bridge from the conscious to the unconscious. Like with your breathing, for example. You can breathe consciously, you can choose to, or you can just let the air fall in and out of your lungs and kind of step back. And I think that in terms of creating a relaxed state, I think that's incredibly useful. Any function that can be controlled consciously and unconsciously provides a bridge where you can get someone engaged in an exercise by doing. So it's just it's a good bridge from the conscious to the unconscious.
You mentioned the Tamil word, Anna. Were you raised with a religious framework?
Yeah, so I was raised in a Hindu home. And so my family is still Hindu, immediate family. And then extended family has a lot of other components. Like I have some Christian family members. I have some Islamic family members, like uncles and aunts and cousins. And I myself moved away from Hinduism. So I went from being a Hindu to being a bit more agnostic to now being an atheist. And
no, never.
So I'm an atheist, but
You and Sam Harris.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. So I think a lot like Sam, who sees the value in spirituality, I also see it in the sense of its ability to change conscious experience. And so, I think it's been an interesting journey, which I'm happy to chat about more.
So, I mean, I'm very curious about religion or the word spirituality in the context of well-being and in the context of how we understand and interpret the world. And I was raised in a Jewish home, not a religious Jewish home, but quite a traditional Jewish home. And my dad also had a guru when I was a little girl, who he actually recently visited heard speak again in Johannesburg recently. Okay. And so I kind of had this very blended experience growing up that I think has always lent a kind of meaning and purpose to my experience of the world, and which doesn't always make rational sense to me. And I think at a moment in the world where there's so much conflict between what people believe and how that divides us, rather than how it connects us, I feel quite estranged from some of the constructs, just because of how married to that experience of the world it is. I don't know. How did you consciously move out of one into another?
Yeah, so I think I've always been quite a questioner and a critical thinker. And for me, I need a lot of evidence before I buy into a claim, or I need a rational understanding of whatever my experience is as well. And just through that questioning process, I slowly started to realize that a lot of people have different beliefs, but a lot of these beliefs aren't necessarily justified in the sense of what is the reason.
No, they're just narratives.
To believe this, yeah.
They're just stories.
Yeah. So, that was my sense. And so I see...
Well, I suppose maybe that's not a fair thing to say, because that's not how everybody sees it.
Yes.
Okay, so apologies.
well, but that is definitely, I agree with you, that's how I see it, in the sense that I haven't had someone make a claim and provide sufficient evidence for me to be able to buy into it as yet.
My husband's gone on a multi-day hike, and last night I was putting my 4-year-old to bed, and she said, "Mom, where's Dad going?" So I said, "No, he's going to be in nature for a few days and he'll be back soon." So she said, "Mom, is nature God?" And so I said, "Yes, in a way, I think we could say yes." And then she said, "So he's going to be with God for 5 days?" And thankfully she didn't ask me any other questions after that.
It's a smart kid.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I for me, I think that religious deconstruction process can be pretty rough, in the sense that you don't necessarily have any anchors or anything to hold on to, no solid ground under your feet. And so it's led me to a lot of exploration into different fields and spaces. I mean, I've been on 10-day silent meditation retreats. I've taken ayahuasca with a Peruvian shaman, and I've been on just many different journeys, like holotropic breath work and all sorts of things.
So let's talk about the altered state, because my own experiences of the altered state have always felt very godly, whatever the hell that means, or deeply connecting and deeply reassuring, and it's interesting to me that you've deconstructed those experiences in a different way.
Right. Yes. Look, those experiences are extremely profound. I don't think I can do them justice by splicing them into words, because there's just something about those experiences, as you'll know, that's so ineffable. It's like, I think the best analogy I've heard for these altered states is, it's like trying to download a 10 gigabyte file onto a 10 megabyte memory stick or USB. That really resonates with me, because there's just a profundity that you can't put into verbal terms. You can't string it together. It's almost insulting to try to string it together into a few words, because it's so profound and deep.
But do you think that that's just brain chemistry and not something versus something mystical?
I think it could be anything, but I don't have good enough reason to stake my claim. You know what it is?
Yes.
So I wouldn't be surprised if we learn that consciousness, that we are like the antennas of consciousness, and it's being transmitted, from some larger source, and we're receiving the consciousness. And so the brain state is the brain state is like television. So the programming isn't being generated from inside the TV, it's coming from another source. I wouldn't be surprised if the hardware of the brain is just the housing unit that receives consciousness, and there is some deeper mystical origin or source, or some interconnected collective consciousness that we all embody as individuals. If I realized that at the moment of death, I wouldn't be
marvelous.
Yeah, it would be marvelous, and I wouldn't be surprised. I'd say, okay, makes sense. But if it turns out that there's nothingness, I also won't really be there to experience it, and so that to me wouldn't be surprising either, if that were to happen. And so I have an open mind about it, but I don't base my claims about physical reality on a conscious state, because I think consciousness can tell us something about our state, but we can't deduce the facts of external reality based on it. You can't meditate your way into an understanding of a neuron. A neuron takes external inspection to understand the architecture of the brain. We need we need a neuroscience for that. You can meditate your way into some fantastic brain states, but again, that experiential quality doesn't tell you anything about the physical structure of the brain. And so I think the same applies to altered states. As profound and deep as they are, it tells you something about what's possible in the experiential realm, but not necessarily about the structure of reality itself. So that's how I see it.
It feels to me as if people are more anxious and depressed than they have ever been. How do you contextualize that against a lack of consciousness, or a less intentional consciousness that we are? I think that many of us are guilty of every day.
So when you say a lesser consciousness or less intentional?
What did you call it? Conscious awareness.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like there's maybe a more unconscious awareness than conscious awareness in the zeitgeist. I don't know if you'd agree with that. People are distracted and they're busy and their
attention is fragmented.
Yes, our attention is very fragmented. Can you speak a little bit to how solving for that, or empowering people with tools to ameliorate that, could help to shift people towards a more contented state?
Right. So firstly, I agree with you, absolutely. I read, are you aware of Gallup's state of the world's emotional health survey. So very interesting if you're ever interested on how the world is feeling.
Yes.
Just go to Gallup. Gallup is one of the biggest statistical.
Like a horse Gallup.
Yeah. Yes. So Gallup, they're one of the biggest organizations in terms of global polling and statistics. So they do it across many fields like economics, sociology, but they're doing emotional surveys now. And so over the past 10 years or so, experiences like worry, sadness, anger, stress, and physical pain are going up. So you're spot on. Your intuition is backed up by actual data. And so people are more depressed, anxious as usual. And some people say that's just the result of the fact that we have more metrics to measure these things. We have more assessments. We care more about it now. And so this isn't a fact about how people are feeling. It's more the fact that we care about it more and we're collecting more data. But I don't think that's the case. I think we are actually, like our conscious state is becoming less pleasant over time because there are certain things, certain behavioral indicators that you can't attribute to increases in psychometric data collection, like suicide. So suicide rates are going up and the average age of suicide is decreasing. So there's younger and younger children are unfortunately taking their own lives. That has been tracked very cleanly, quantitatively. And we know that that's increasing over time. And obviously that gives us, that's like a litmus test for how mental health is doing. And so I think the world is getting worse in terms of our mental health, even though we're progressing on so many economic and technological frontiers. There's this weird, you could say, worsening of our mental health. So in terms of the role that our awareness plays in that, our conscious awareness and the fragmentation thereof, I think there's definitely a negative driver of mental states there, because there's a clear escalation of worsening mental health at the point where Facebook becomes a big thing. So I recently gave a talk to a big hospital franchise on digital wellness, and I was doing a lot of research to prepare for that. And one of the upticks in the worsening mental health and distress symptoms clearly pivoted at the point where social media became a big thing. And so there's something, I think, in particular about social media and these mass, that's fragmenting attention and that's worsening mental health. And that is leading to a lot of social comparison, a lot of upward social comparison that's obviously based on, like people's best presentations of themselves, but a lot of false upward social comparison and a lot of self-esteem issues and resulting anxiety and depression that comes from that. And I think it's a huge problem, which is why partly I make these videos on social media, because a lot of people in my comment section, something that I see actually on a daily basis, is people saying, "Thank you so much. I was about to doom scroll for an hour and then or skip out on sleep for 3 hours of sleep," which we know is fundamental to mental health, right? Sleep is like a non-negotiable foundation for your emotional well-being. And so I think you're spot on. There's definitely something here.
I feel like the cat's out of the bag though, and how do we pull ourselves back? Because it's not going away. If anything, it's just worse. And it feels like it's worse in spite of the fact that it's also democratized access to things like the tools that you share. But those still seem to be drowned out by all the other awful things. And I don't know, where do you think that tipping point is? Or how do we move that needle?
Yeah, I think it's important for intervention to happen at many levels. So I think we need a multi-level intervention if we're truly going to change the effect that these things have on our state. and the quality of our lives. Of course, there are things we can do as individuals. So at the individual level, definitely reclaiming your attention is becoming more and more important over time. I've even noticed with myself, like sometimes my thumb just like automatically goes to an app, without me thinking. It's just, it becomes, these apps are designed in such rewarding ways that it just becomes so habitual.
To open them.
To open them, to open them and to get stuck there as well. Oftentimes I've also found myself on certain apps or watching shows, and it just makes you feel worse and worse over time, but you keep doing it. And I think that's because of, this distinction between wanting versus liking in neuroscience. Like there are different brain regions for wanting, which is that motivation, that drive. It's a bit more dopaminergically mediated, versus liking, which is actually finding some satisfaction in something, some enjoyment, some savoring of it.
Does the liking take more work?
I think it does. Yeah, it's a good question.
Do you know what I mean? Maybe there's more effort required there, like going on a hike or having a cold shower.
Yes.
I don't know. It's interesting.
It's a great question. I think you're probably right. I think in the current configuration of how our lives look.
I'm also sorry to interrupt you. I'm also
sure.
just thinking about another irony or paradox is the advent of all these GLP-1 drugs, and how they work predominantly on blunting your dopaminergic system. So we're all in this kind of, this overabundance of food and content and screens and experiences. And at the same time, there's this massive, economically very rewarding avalanche of new drugs to blunt those systems, rather than all of us taking responsibility for what we do and how we pay attention, or what we pay attention to.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like we really are between a rock and a hard place.
Yeah, I definitely think so. I think things will continue to get worse. I think individuals can hold the fort, but I don't think they can make things better in the long term, truly. That takes policy, it takes political movements, it takes organizational shifts.
We need to get some psychedelics into parliament.
Yeah, I agree. Yes, that's one way to think about it is maybe we just get to the individuals who hold the most power. We need to create a short list and
we grind some shrooms into
some shroom tea, flavorless.
We need a world summit with shrooms.
I agree. Yes, a world summit would be a great fishnet.
Is there anything else interesting in that AI talk that you did that you want to speak to?
Yeah, so there was a lot that was interesting. I think so. I did a talk recently on AI and mental health, and what is very interesting is how AI is influencing mental health, and it's influencing it through three key pathways. One is as a direct tool that people are using for their mental health, right? A second is a tool that clinicians are using to help their clients. And then the third is as a general force. It's just the AI is this force in the world that is influencing mental health, which is also very interesting. Probably the most difficult to
quantify.
To quantify, absolutely, and to research. But when it comes to the first category, people using AI-assisted chatbots, for example, as therapists and things like that, there is actually some interesting data showing that can be beneficial for individuals, but it's oftentimes for simpler psychological issues that can be boxed in a bit in terms of their symptomatology, like a mild anxiety disorder, a panic attack, things like this. But what we see most of the time as clinical psychologists in therapy is a very complex life with life circumstances and specific environments and specific goals for their life going forward. And I think that's where it still is a bit tricky for these chatbots, and there's not much research done on that yet. I don't even know how you would do that, because therapy is such an interesting space. People come there with different goals, first of all. Nobody comes to therapy for exactly the same reason. And even when they do have the same goals, sometimes they change their goals as they start to gain more insight into their situation. Sometimes they say, oh, you know what, I thought I wanted to come to therapy to stop procrastinating, but I realized that the reason the procrastination is bothering me is because I feel this need to be successful because of how my father treated me in my childhood. And so actually, you know what? No, the procrastination is not the problem. Like, that's not my goal to address. Actually, I'm in the wrong field. I've never done something I love because I've just been trying to fulfill my father's dream. And so literally there's a dynamic nature of goals in therapy. And so AI, I mean, it's so difficult to measure outcomes there, because you have to define what the outcome is to know whether AI is effective or not in helping. And the outcomes themselves are dynamic. So there's a real issue there in measuring that on the first pathway. The second pathway, there's a lot of promise in how AI's natural language processing can look at transcripts of therapy sessions. So I think that's a very cool aspect of research into AI, because we just can't do that at scale as therapists.
Yes.
We can't go word for word.
And you also you often can't remember everything that we shared.
No, we're pathetic compared to like artificial intelligence in terms of remembering things and also identifying patterns. I mean, AI is so good at identifying patterns. So it will be really good at picking up specific processes that are playing out in the session.
And people that are at particular risk of suicide, maybe.
Yeah. So
For
that's
example.
that is literally one of the best, the most promising areas is risk identification. That's where it's actually doing really
I
well.
have noticed that there's also newly a lot of disclaimers and caveats, and I can't go there, or I can't give you advice like this, or this is not medical advice.
Yes.
That when it first all came out didn't feel like it was as much part of the conversation.
Yes, I agree. So that was that second bucket, and then just to speak briefly about the third bucket, one very interesting area is AI being used for loneliness, like people who are lonely, because now suddenly you have this being. We don't know if it's a sentient being or not yet, but it is this presence, and it is there for you, and it's validating, and it listens, and it's willing to hear you out and adjust based on what you need.
Is there data on that yet?
There is. So I came across about 3 studies.
Yeah.
3 studies that show that it's helpful for loneliness. But there was a major caveat, which is when the individual is quite emotionally distressed due to the loneliness, it's actually counterproductive. So it's good for mild loneliness, but severe loneliness, it actually makes it worse. And the researchers don't quite know why that is. There's some speculations in the papers, but I find that interesting. I'm also a bit confused about that, but it seems to be helpful for mild loneliness. But if you really are relying on the AI as your
social connection.
Yes, if there's displacement
Yes.
of real social interaction, that's, I think, where it gets a bit dodgy.
It's so interesting that we've all isolated, that we're just living in so much isolation from each other compared to how we used to. There was that study in 2020 that I'm sure you've also come across that compared the impact of loneliness on risk for physical disease.
Yes.
To, I think it was 15 cigarettes a day.
Yes.
You think of these things as just emotional, abstract, ephemeral constructs, but they actually have a physical impact.
Yeah. How you feel matters.
Yeah. And I think touch and real people are so important.
Yeah, we're really deprived of that. You're right. I've seen one on loneliness around, they exposed some people to the rhinovirus, and they wanted to see who contracted it and whose symptoms were the worst. Have you come across that study? Very interesting. They could predict who would contract it and the severity of the symptoms based on a survey that they had done beforehand.
Yes.
And the survey had a very simple question, which was, how connected are you in your life? And so they broke that down into sub-questions, like how many, do you have social support? Do you have someone you could call at 1 a.m. and you know they would support you? How many connections do you have? What's the quality of the connections? But basically this idea of connectedness could predict whether someone would contract.
So amazing.
Yeah.
I'm also just thinking about the microbiome. So all the microbes that line your gastrointestinal tract from your mouth to your anus, even just sharing space with people, you're exchanging microbes. And being physically intimate with people, you're exchanging microbes. And there's this idea that being married to somebody and intimate with somebody for a very long time will make you more genetically similar to that person than your parents eventually, because so much of our genetic coding comes from microbes. And so, the interconnectedness is just so beautiful and so deep. Nevern, if you could leave our listeners with, 3 things, what would they be?
I think one would be that your experience matters, and it's worth checking in with yourself, and it's worth reflecting on how you feel and what's driving those feelings. A lot of us are concerned more with the doing aspect of our lives than the being aspect. And they're always happening in parallel, because regardless of what you're doing, there's a felt tone to your experience. There's always this affective tone, whether you're aware of it or not. And usually tips to pleasant or unpleasant. It's very rarely neutral. And I think we live in a world where we really focus so much on trying to have a good life that we don't really consider the other half, which is, do I feel good? Not just are good things happening to me, am I doing good things, but do I feel good while doing them? And I think that's been left behind. There's so much emphasis on hustle and grind and success and money and wealth acquisition and fame and fortune, whatever, success, however that's described. But ultimately, I think a lot of people are chasing things, success or anything external, because of how they're hoping they will feel once they have it. Will I feel safe? Or can I finally feel secure? Or can I finally breathe? Can I finally relax? Can I finally feel content or satisfied? And I think that's a long cut to acquiring the states that we all inherently care about. Jeremy Bentham, the philosopher, says that nature has bestowed us with 2 masters, pain and pleasure. And I think there's something very true about that, in the sense that if you're in pain, you can't argue it away. Pain intrinsically brings with it the feeling that we don't want it. That's unquestionable. That's just a fact about nature. And so, and same with pleasure. And I define pleasure very broadly to be any agreeable form of consciousness, not just sensory pleasure in the moment, but desirable consciousness across time, to really feel a baselineness of okayness deep in your core. So I would say, whether you realize it or not, that matters. Because if you're in sufficient pain, if you're in sufficient suffering, you will wish you weren't in it. And so it's worthwhile working on your state, protecting your state, building your baseline level of calm and happiness, and just cultivating a beautiful garden within yourself, which I think less and less people are doing over time. So I think that would be, I'm pretty sure there's 3 things in what I just said, so
absolutely,
that would be what I'd leave them with.
I think it's so important. I loved how you divided good things are happening to me, but versus I'm feeling good about the things that are happening to me. So often I sit in, and as I'm sure you do, sit in my consultation room, and these really outwardly everything good people bringing all these everything good experiences with them tell me how they're feeling, and I'm shocked
Yeah.
that there's just such a divorce between the experience of all those good things
Yeah.
and sometimes I think there's like a malalignment in your work or in your relationship or in what you have to do all day that drives so many of these things. And I suppose those are difficult revelations to have because we all have to pay bills
Mm-hmm.
and raise children and all these things.
And I think the beautiful thing about that disconnect is, well, it can seem like a bad thing, the fact that it can be disconnected, that you can have everything you could materially desire but still feel miserable. But the upside of that is that whatever you need to do, even if it's paying bills, like you said, it means there's an opportunity to connect a pleasant experience to that. If you learn how to do it, if you learn how to, this is wonderful field of job crafting where you just, there was the story of a therapist who worked with a teller at a grocery store. And they just hated it, they found it mundane and brainless work. But they actually enjoyed connecting with people. But they weren't connecting with people because their consciousness was just absorbed in the mundaneness of it. And the therapist pulled them out of that and said, if this is your strength, connecting with people, and if this is what naturally just makes your experience more pleasant, why don't you play a game where you either greet someone or you tell them a joke or you give them a compliment? So they started playing these social games to connect with people. And that totally changed their well-being in their job. And suddenly the work, they have to pay bills and they have to be there. But suddenly they've attached a different conscious experience to that external happening. And I think that's the beauty of the disconnect, is that regardless of where you are, there's room to massage how you feel while doing it.
And so clearly a role for people like you to help people to do that.
Yes.
So thank you so much for the wisdom that you bring and the work that you do in the world. And we'll share it in the show notes where people can find you and watch you and be more embodied and mindful with you.
Yes.
Thank you, Nevern.
Thanks, Skye. Lovely to be here. Definitely a pleasant conscious experience. Yeah, desirable.
Me too. I'm so grateful. This podcast is made possible by the generous support of Health with Heart. Health with Heart, my real day job, is a corporate wellness business bringing integrative, holistic, whole-person medicine to organizations through education, ergonomics, screening, and on-site medical services. If you are a business of 50 or more people, we would so love to connect with you and see how we can elevate the well-being of all of your people, your greatest asset.